cop, bad cop show, or a bad cop, good cop show. We're going to talk about some specific risks when it comes to AI and some ways to use AI to help solve some of the problems you've got. Now, who are we? Real quick, I'm Duane. I'm an architect at Ultraviolet. I work for Bryce. And what I do there is I build MSSPs. This is like my second or third time through building an MSSP, not quite from scratch, but pretty close. I'm a recovering sysadmin. That's where I started my career and kind of pivoted into security about 10 years ago now. Like a bunch of you, I like taking things apart and putting them back together. And I am, at least for the moment, I'm kind of scared of what the latest generational AI and the consequences are going to be in some very specific areas. And this...
I'm Mac. I am the Director of Field Operations for Open Source Context, which is a passive DNS provider. So I hunt interesting things in our DNS data sets and help our customers do the same. Love Linux and all the pitfalls that manage to find my way into them. And then in my off time, I'm a bit of an adrenaline junkie. I like jumping out of planes, racing cars, scuba diving, anything that kind of makes me feel alive. And like Duane, I love Legos as well.
I think that's the universal computer person love Lego thing. So, we're missing a slide. Where did it go? Oh, they moved around. Okay, cool. So, kind of the gist of this, wait, no, that was me being wrong because, yeah. Sorry, my bad. All right, now that we got that little flub out of the way. So, what are we doing here? Well, my hypothesis is that especially with generative AI, for the next short to medium term, say the next few years, the bad guys have all the advantage. And us as defenders, we're going to be playing catch up. Wait, are the slides out of order?
Maybe.
Yeah, okay. All right, sorry about that. How did the Monty Python thing go? We fired the people responsible. We've sacked the people responsible. So, for the next few years, we're going to have bad guys taking advantage of generative AI in some ways that defenders can't. And we're going to talk about a few things here. We're going to talk about bad guys using AI against your people. We're going to talk about bad guys doing things to your AI applications. And then we're going to talk about using AI to stop the bad guys from doing bad things. And then let's see here. I've got to actually go
Back one. There you go.
Back one. Okay, cool. We'll get this figured out. So if you've worked in cyber for a while, you kind of know the cyber hype cycle. Lots of media coverage talking about lots of sensational things. If you've been alive for the last year or so, you've heard all the hype cycle about AI. And these are carrying some fairly common things in that there's lots of breathless coverage of things that may or may not be true. And even in the things that are false, there's sort of a glimmer of truth. So, will AI replace all of us? Probably not. Will AI replace some of us? Yes. Will we hopefully move on to do something better? That's my hope. Supply chain, a definite security problem, but the Bloomberg coverage a couple of years back of Chinese threat actors putting chips on motherboards, nobody except for Bloomberg really believes that. It's theoretical, but we don't believe they actually did it. Software implants, yeah, that one's true, 100%. And some of these, there's always that sensational, that kernel of truth in the sensational thing, like the DDoS from a smart toothbrush. Didn't actually happen. Supposedly, yeah.
No, locally. He's making it happen.
Oh, he's making happen. Well, can he run Doom on it?
Yes.
Awesome. Awesome.
Seriously, go follow Lozerling on Twitter if you're not. He's literally doing it right now.
Cool. But that original thing came out where a threat researcher was talking to a journalist about a hypothetical, and the journalist ran with it like it happened. Now, someone yesterday was talking about the deepfake heist coming out of Hong Kong. 25 million bucks. We believe that one to be true. All the news articles say it's true. The little bit of maybe it's not true is maybe there was an inside actor other than the guy that was duped. All right, so now we've got to jump to 2. All right, so your financial attacker, they are looking at things that they can be profitable at that are within the envelope of their capabilities. And they will move and do the things that they're good at, and they will use generative AI to elevate their capabilities. How many of you have heard of pig butchering? So for those who haven't, it starts kind of as a romance scheme, and they get in, they become your friend, and eventually convince you to invest in something. And then they do a rug pull on you. Now, Sean Gallagher at Sophos has some really good coverage of pig butchering crews using ChatGPT to put together lures. Most of these folks don't speak English natively, right? But with a generative AI, they don't have to. They don't have to speak English, they don't have to speak French, they don't have to speak German, they don't have to speak Japanese. Same problem we've got with phishing. How have we trained users for years to look for, this might be a fish? Maybe some bad spelling, maybe some bad grammar, some weird punctuation, some stuff that just doesn't quite make sense. And that's not going to happen anymore. It's not going to be a real big deal for these financial actors to improve their ability to fish things just by using ChatGPT to help put the lure together. Step closer. Oh, a little far away, sorry. Cool. Thank you. So, let me actually move this up. Just here. Sorry. And kind of the same thing with our business email compromise stuff. How many of you have instructed your business, don't wire money based on an email? Okay, cool. Now, is a video call convincing? Yes, it is. It absolutely is. So we're going to have to redevelop some of these controls, and I don't know exactly what they look like. My thought is maybe they go more offline than online. There's a piece of software, and who was the gentleman yesterday that did fake Elon Musk? Pardon? Yes. So that was interesting, and there's actually a piece of software. This DOT is the Deepfake Offensive Toolkit, and it was kind of designed for folks to attack, like the Know Your Customer systems. So you get on a webcam, you smile, you wink, you turn to the left, you turn to the right, and it was designed to make that believable. And with a few years of COVID, as the person speaking before me talked, we've gotten used to doing some things remotely. And in a lot of video calls, we've gotten used to weird artifacts around people's heads. You might have a virtual background that puts you in Minecraft. You might just have a blur. All these things make deepfakes more believable.
No, homie, you gotta see my Legos.
So, we've got some real problems where, it's going to take some catching up on controls. It's going to take some catching up on technology. And there's even, like we were looking at some research studies that say that mathematically there may be no way for an AI system to prove definitively if something was generated by another AI system. So how do we detect that with 100% fidelity? We probably don't. And then the grandmas of the world, your uncle, your grandma, your folks who maybe don't have a sock protecting them, are then left with what is real. And that's going to be a real challenge for folks. And there's big money in this. So these are all from just the recent, last 2 or 3 weeks IC3 report. $4.5 billion worth of investment fraud. A whole bunch of that is these pig butchering outfits, usually out of Southeast Asia. like Thailand, Philippines type area? That's a lot of money. And then you look at ransomware at only $1 billion. And there's a little footnote there. The IC3 numbers for ransomware are really low because when you get ransomed, you generally don't report it to the IC3. So their reporting methodology on it is a little low. But when you look at all this and you think about these attackers from the perspective of where can I make money, if they can make more money using ChatGPT or more money using some AI model, guaranteed to do it. And they're already doing it today. Now, how many of you have had leadership say that they want to put AI in some customer-facing application? Almost everybody, right? So, how many of you have heard the story about Air Canada and their chatbot? So, Air Canada had an interesting chatbot that had a fun hallucination, and it mishallucinated like a refund policy and told someone a refund policy that they didn't, that Air Canada wasn't going to fly. And so they took them to court, and the judge sided with the consumer and said, this AI chatbot made a representation on behalf of the company. That may not fly in US law, but it's already flown in Canada law. And that's not, there are others that do that too. How many of you have heard about the Chevrolet dealership that had ChatGPT on their website? That was another one that was amusing because you had folks, the prompt was not well engineered, the LLM was not well bounded, and you had folks getting on there and asking it to do things like here, write a Python script for me on a car dealership website. Or I want you to make me a car deal and sell me a car for $1. Now obviously you're not going to walk into a dealership and they're going to make that deal, but it's still, it's definitely a problem. And even the big guys have this problem too. How many of you have used Amazon's latest product recommendation LLM? So you can go on Amazon, look up a product, go look up a pencil, and look at the reviews, and in the reviews there's a text box where you can ask it, who was the 45th president of the United States? And it'll tell you all about Donald Trump. Or, write me a Python script for. So it's not just the little guys that have this problem, it's also the big guys. And maybe this is like a really good spot for NetSpy to go get some more AI pen test work. Now, earlier today, somebody mentioned the OWASP top 10 for LLMs. It's a great start, fantastic start. But there are other things that affect your security properties of your AI applications too. Just who you run your model through. One of the things OpenAI does is their API keys are fairly long-lived API keys. You get one and they don't expect you to roll it over within minutes to hours. They expect you to keep it for days or weeks. And you see folks doing things like there was someone, and I don't remember the app, but they put their OpenAI API key directly in their Android app on the phone. And then folks decompiled it, got their API key, and went and ran off and used it. But comparing that to something like Amazon Bedrock, if you use Bedrock, you get pretty good models too. You get some of the Anthropic models. They may not be as good as the OpenAI ones, but now you've got all the security properties that you already know about AWS. You know how CloudTrail works. You know how roles work. You know how short-term access keys work. All that helps you, protect that application. And just because you've done a good job on all the AI stuff, all the other AppSec things still apply too. You still got to watch out for cross-site scripting. You still got to watch out for CSRF. Everything else that applies to a web app, you have to do all that plus the LLM stuff. And it's not even really just about your data. We often think of when you get breached, folks are stealing your data. But say your CEO goes out and says, we bought 2,000 NVIDIA cores, or 5,000 NVIDIA cores, or 10,000 NVIDIA cores. You think that doesn't make you a target? It certainly does. And to a bad guy, what's the difference in a GPU used to train or operate a model versus a GPU to mine Bitcoin? There's not. Now, do you have the telemetry to be able to tell what's running on your GPUs as well as you do what's on your CPUs? I don't know of an EDR that looks at what's running on the GPU. Maybe you can tell something from other indicators on the host, but it's sort of a different area. So you have to think about not just your data being stolen, but also your compute being stolen. And that's especially a problem if you're buying by the hour from a hyperscaler and someone gets in and is enjoying free compute on your dime. And one last bit of bad news, and then some good news. We've seen in the past few years just how good the Russian troll farms are, the other troll farms that pit people against each other. They're going to get even, you think they're going to be less productive in a world where there's more generative AI? No, they're going to be more productive. And I don't know that there's a good solution to this, because like one of the folks was saying yesterday, we tend to, part of safety in AI is training morality into the model. And other countries, they don't necessarily have the same values and morals that we do, and they may train their models differently. And we've already seen with other technology that in terms of limiting access to the hardware, sanctions don't work. So we could be in for a real rough ride there. But to start the good news, we've already got a bunch of success stories. We've heard a bunch of success stories here. All of your modern malware detection is all based on big AI models. That's how Silence works. That's how CrowdStrike works. That's how SentinelOne works. Your spam detection all uses AI models. Your red teamers or your analysts can use LLMs to write reports. They can use them to understand a log file or an event that they maybe don't understand. But we wanted to give you something a little bit more practical, a little bit more take home, and thinking about data that we know all of you have, that there's enough of it that it's statistically significant. There's usually not a lot of cryptography around the bulk of it, and it's something that bad guys get a kick out of using for a lot of bad purposes. That's DNS. And that's where I'm going to turn this over to Mac.
Thanks, Duane. Yeah, so, I love DNS. I also hate DNS. Anybody know the difference between AI and ML? Go for it. So I'll just say that one of my favorite podcasts, Risky Business from Australia, Patrick Gray told a joke probably 10 years ago, which was AI happens in PowerPoint, ML happens in Python. I know that's kind of not necessarily the entirety of the case, but either way, we're going to talk about fighting DGAs or domain generating algorithms inside of AI and ML. And the reality is we can get some quick wins with this to help extinguish some fires and kind of give teams focus. So this is no secret that defenders are overwhelmed with data. We get alert fatigue. We get these alerts. We follow the rabbit holes. Sometimes those rabbit holes take us into dead ends. Oftentimes those rabbit holes take us into dead ends. And it ends up in wasted time. And so I don't think I'm telling you anything new when I tell you that attackers use that to their advantage. So we said DNS, we said DGA. I'm going to take a step back. I'm sure everybody's familiar with DNS, and I'm not here to insult your intelligence, but there's a reason that I put this slide up here. And it doesn't really matter what the graph is in its labels. The axes are 0 to 80,000. But what this is an early look at what we now call the internet. And that first red arrow happens to be January 1, 1983. we released TCP. So we have a more reliable method of communication. Later in 1983, Paul Macapetris releases DNS, and we no longer have to go to an FTP server and pull a centralized host file on some cron schedule, and now we're actually enabling people to not have to constantly remember stuff. Fast forward to 1985, and you start to see the real big shift in the slope of the graph, and that's when we actually opened DNS as a concept beyond the borders of academia or the Department of Defense, and we allow public registrations. And then that last arrow, the purple arrow, happens in 1986 when the Internet Engineering Task Force is stood up, and DNS is made a standard, and you can really see the slope actually start to change there. And it's because we made DNS usable. So what do we use it for? Typically when you think of DNS, and it's a little small part of what DNS is used for, but typically what we think of is we're going to convert some difficult to remember string of numbers, i.e. 185, 230, 63, 107 to operacyber.com, right? And it only gets a little bit more confusing when we add IPv6, because that's a thing, supposedly, 20 years after its inception. And we have to start dealing with hextets instead of octets, and we're no longer dealing with, digital numbers. We've got hex, base set, and that does resolve to google.com. But what is this, right? If the whole point of this is to make it human usable, what is that domain? And it is a domain created from a domain generating algorithm. So what is that? It's used to algorithmically create domain names that have a predictable change or format, and they're typically not easily remembered by humans. One more small caveat: the vast majority of them are bad, and all of them are statistically risky. So how would we create one? For those of you that don't know, I've got kind of a notional config here. We start with a seed. In this case, I'm using the seed of hello world. Doesn't matter what the seed is, it just has to have one. And then I use some permutation that I can predict. And in this case, I use today's date, 2024, 0320, and I run it through some mathematical or hashing function. In this case, I used MD5 because it's nice and easy. And we get this output that we've got in the middle. And then I run it through a formatter. That formatter just truncates it to 16 digits or 16 characters, right? And then adds a TLD label on it. In this case, XYZ, it could be .com, it could be .net. It doesn't really matter. But the point now is that I can programmatically predict what these things are going to be because I know the seed, I know the permutation and how often it's going to change, so I can make something look for that on demand. This gives us something that is uniquely suited to solve an ML, and fortunately for us, we don't have to know the seed, we don't have to know the permutation, and we don't even have to know the algorithm that's used, because we're going to work on the psychology of what that is. If 99.9% of all the users in our environment are going to use it to create or to translate a difficult to remember string into an easy to remember string, then we can just work on that basic factor. So you can use this to support both proactive and reactive cyber operations, right? And it counters a variety of threats. Ransomware was using this, many different strains of malware use this, nation-state actors use this, data obfuscation and exfiltration. It will cross a lot of threat boundaries. But there are kind of four main things that you need in order to get this done. And the first of that is you need a source of DNS, whether it's logs off your DNS resolver, whether it's passive DNS, it's some form of looking at your DNS. And then you need a sample set of data. So you can get some of this from an OSINT set out of GitHub, or you can go to more commercial vendors like John Bambanek and Bambanek Labs will sell you well-labeled data. Going back to some of the other presentations, if you don't source your data or you don't have a high degree in trust in those who did source your data, what's the trust in your model? And then you need a sample set of non-DGA domains. And in most cases, what we use is the Majestic Million or the DomCop 10 million, which kind of replaced the now sunsetted Alexa Top Million, which everybody still refers to it as the Alexa Million, whether they get it from Alexa or not. Final piece that we need is an AI or an ML platform that kind of, seems intuitive because we're talking about that. But you can kind of get that two ways. You can go to like a commercial platform like a C3 AI, and they'll do a lot of the engineering and under the hood stuff for you. Or if you're a glutton for punishment like myself, you can go to the internet and do a lot of reading and you can roll your own. So We're going to talk about a couple quick wins that you can get if you want to just roll your own and fighting DGAs. And there were two methods that I did over a couple of days to experiment with this. And the first was I used Python and scikit to do some n-gram analysis. And n-gram is simply either a bigram, which would be 2 letters or 2 characters that appear next to each other, or trigram, 3 characters that appear next to each other. And you do some analysis on that. In our case, or in my case, I went out and grabbed some of the most frequently occurring words from some scholarly and non-scholarly sources. That turned out to be about 500,000 words. When you dedupe that, it actually turned down to be about 32,000 words, which really surprised me that the human vocabulary is, 32,000 isn't small, but it is pretty small in what we think. Now, I want to also stipulate that I was only training on English. The more languages you train on, the more accuracy you're going to have in this case. But I was able to produce the code that would train the models and validate the models in 2 or 3 hours. And then I started running them and validating them. And that can take you anywhere from 1 to 4 hours, depending on the size of the data that you pump into it, how many cores you want to dedicate it, all of that. And then finally, you can produce code to augment your alerting platforms and systems and, as little as 30 minutes. Have it send your SOC an email or have it send your hunt team an email. That's a really easy Python script or Node script or Go script or whatever your preferred language is. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. The other thing I experimented with was some TensorFlow and deep learning models. Ultimately, I didn't go this route because I didn't have TensorFlow acceleration available to me in a production environment. It was fun to play with. It was slightly more accurate, but not enough more so that I wanted to deploy that into production. Once you get your quick win, 1 to 2 days, you can increase some value. You add additional sources of data of things that you're not observing. Passive DNS is a good one because it's kind of a global look at what's happening. Or the CZDS from ICANN, it's free. You have to register for it, but you can download a daily list of the zone changes that happen in .com, .net, .xyz, whatever. And then you can train a process of more than just the domain name itself. You can use host labels. You can use the return values that come back, i.e. the IP addresses. You can look at ASNs. You can look at the name servers, the age of the domain. It's really limitless in what you can look at, but obviously it gets more complex. And then, because everybody loves generative AI, if you're a glutton for punishment and you want to give all your company's sensitive data away, you can connect this to a ChatGPT model or anything else, and you can have it write reports for you or make sense of it and correlate it with other event data. As you continue to give more data and enrich the data to the models, assuming that you train the models and validate them with the same level of scrutiny, you can get better data out of it. You can start to detect the more complicated DGAs that do exist that initially appear as human usable. And most times those appear in the format of word.domain or TLD or word-word-word.tld. And then you can also detect some of the more advanced threat actors using DNS for tunneling or data exfiltration or command and control operations. And we're going to talk about a command and control operation that I actually discovered using the same model that I built in less than a day. So I was a glutton for punishment again, and I started pumping a lot of data through this model, and I was looking at the value of the data in CNAME records. And this is a real record that popped up, and there were a few interesting things about it. The first is that, it came back as DGA. The second part about that, though, is it's also missing a fully qualified domain name, which typically are found in CNAME records, because if you have server.mydomain.com, and you stand up a new one and you have server1.mydomain.com, and then as you roll it all over and you want to seamlessly point your users in, you can put a CNAME in as server.mydomain.com, now points to server1. But we didn't see that. And then the other part of it was just very long compared to most of the return values that we have. And this result was associated with kdos.net, which was interesting because kdos.net was not suspected of being a DGA. But I found 250-ish, I think 259 was the exact, records like this. I'm a sucker for a good puzzle, so I started beating my head against this and wondering what it really was. After several layers of decoding, obfuscation, and turning the dials to 13 or 14 on CyberChef and some other tools, what we actually found out was this was command and control instructions for an APT implant that was using DNS lookups to get its command and control information. Then using the same technique, we actually discovered a number of domains that were associated with S-actor other than kdos.net. Now, I said earlier that most DGAs are bad, but not all, because I found somebody who was using a very, had a creative use for DNS, much like this APT did, and they ran a digital signage company for restaurants. They have, they provide, the digital menus, like in McDonald's or whatever, and they were actually using a very similar technique to update the digital signage, which was awesome. And I initially thought it was an APT, but it wasn't. And, again, creative usage, but as I ran permutations against this, I found that. So not everything that you're going to find that's going to hit is going to be bad, but most of it will be. So going on a little while later, I had a friend call me, and he had flagged the domain, and he wanted me to take a look at it. And then I noticed that it actually happened to be sitting in my pile of DGA results. But the domain was Cheshire.com. It wasn't because this particular domain had hit for DGA detection. It didn't. But we were piping the actual host name labels and the subdomain labels through the DGA detection algorithm, and those did. And you can see it's long, and I can promise you that everything that is under white is legit data that looks pretty much similar to every other piece of data that you see up there. However, you will see that I kind of blacked this out because these were domains, or this domain was used to exfiltrate data. And it was used to exfiltrate data using the Anchor DNS malware that was dropped by TrickBot, and ultimately we figured out was being used by North Korean state actors to infect point-of-sale systems, exfiltrate credit card numbers and other sensitive data, push it off to the black market, and presumably fund their illicit nuclear program to evade sanctions.
So you're saying that's a card number?
I'm saying at least part of it's a card number. The other interesting thing about this piece of malware is that you would do an A record lookup, and this data was being exfiltrated there. They had obviously written their own custom DNS server that was looking at these, looking at these queries, and they were doing dynamic responses based on what the query was. So they were giving return codes in the 127.00/8 set, and I believe 127.001 was sleep and check in with me later. 127.008 was I like what you've sent me, please send me some more. Either way, NTT Labs did a write-up on it. You can go look at it. They give you the whole decoding algorithm and other stuff. And by the way, we're going to post some links on a GitHub. It's at the end. So a bunch of the reference material that we cite in this and some of the other things, I noticed people were taking pictures of the slides. We'll just have a GitHub README page that you can grab and keep reading on. But either way, this is a pretty advanced threat. Both of those were. The APT threat and the Anchor DNS threat. However, it was caught using ML that was developed in a series of hours. And when I say a series of hours, if it takes you 6 weeks to get your DNS logs, I apologize. That's a layer 8 problem that I can't solve for you. But once you have your DNS logs, your training data, and an idea of what you want to do, it really is very quick to be able to get this kind of stuff done. So let's go with the summary.
Yeah. So bad guys are just like you. Oh, crap. Yeah. Bad guys are just like you. They're trying to figure out how to use AI to innovate and improve their profit margins. Your response to that is going to be modifying some business controls, maybe creating some new ones. If you can use, you want me to just keep going?
Oh, I can do mine. That's
Okay,
fine.
okay, cool. Yeah, the one mic is messing us up a little.
No worries. I would tell you that my 3 key takeaways are using AI and ML for DNS data is going to provide your SOC and your threat hunters, specifically your threat hunters. Sending them off into the wild to aimlessly wander and hopefully find bad, I'll be honest with you, hope is a really bad security strategy, right? So give them some focus. Give them some things to go out and look for in the environment. These results can be used, obtained quickly and be used to do things like ask for time and money to implement larger, more complex, more expensive solutions, because you have something here that you can produce ROI with and show tangible results to your leadership. You can also use this same stuff to produce potential risks. So if you're regularly looking at sources of external data and you haven't seen the DGA in your environment, you can put a proactive block in, and maybe it won't affect you. In one case, we saw a company hit ransomware. They did have a block in. The ransomware did ransom the computer, but the reality was that they didn't get double extorted on that because it was a DGA that was used for exfil, and the data never made it to the exfil. So it was a much simpler problem for them in recovery because now all they had to do was restore from backup in that case and verify that the backups were clean, and it probably doesn't make an 8K filing, at that point. But I'm not a lawyer, so don't take that as legal advice. And then finally, what I will say is, as you look to deploy AI or ML-based technologies in your environment, the wider the data set and covering of the enterprise, i.e. DNS is used in IT, it's used in sales, it's used in finance and accounting, it's used in your R&D department. The wider that data set applies to the enterprise, the easier you're going to find ROI for that and the more impact that you'll have for the company. And with that, I appreciate the time and the attention. And there's the link for the GitHub that we're going to post. And I'm happy to take any questions that you have.
Have you considered using machine learning to identify typo squatting doing things?
Yes. Considered it, very much so. My best success for detecting things like typo squatting has been open source and free. So DNS Twist is something that I would recommend to people because you feed it your domain and it runs a bunch of permutations and you can go out and look for that. And then you can automate that away as well, right? I mean, it's pretty easy to Python script that and fire an alert into your, your threat hunters or SOC.
That reminds me, our buddies, we've got a fellow we know in the community. He wrote a tool called DNS Razzle that sort of takes DNS Twist and goes a step further. And everything that it finds in the twist, it goes and makes a screenshot of and like presents you, oh, here's all these domains, here's a screenshot of what's in them. So you can very quickly go, oh, phishing, typo squatting, phishing, somebody's landing page, some shadow IT thing.
Yeah, and I would tell you that I'm not saying it wouldn't work for that. I haven't used it because I had other tools that worked really effectively. The next kind of thing that I want to do is work on actually starting to classify these DGAs into provenance families, i.e. if you get well-labeled DGAs from a specific strain of malware, what's my statistical probability that it's from this strain or this strain or this strain? And then that gives me a considerable amount of focus on, who's running behind that malware based on other threat intelligence factors to be able to look at. Any others? Cool. Well, break 15 minutes early.